What's up, everybody? Party Science Vlog here. Today I have a repeat guest. We are going to be talking about his book, none other than Jim DiCecca. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Nice. Okay. Awesome. It was cool. You sent me your book, I want to say a month ago, maybe a little whiles back.
Yeah.
And I finished reading it. And I got to say, I understand why you wrote it. I'm going to ask it for the sake of the video. After going through it, it makes a lot of sense to me. The mad as hell part from the beginning, kind of setting the tone, to explaining the timeline on how everything played out, to the secrecy behind everything, to eventually where they try to swap it into another bill and got that bill out so that you were just, if I'm understanding it correctly, from what I read, and then having to get all the petitions at the end by goal in order to be able to fight all the things that happen behind closed doors. So when you were putting this all together, what kind of sparked it? What, like, when you thought about Betrayed and how you felt about it all, like, how did it all begin for you?
Yeah, it's sort of like I've always been one of those ones when you see something wrong, you should do something about it. Mm-hmm. And I feel no matter what side of this topic that you're on, the way this legislature and politicians and media and what have you handled this particular topic was really almost criminal, in my mind. So again, me being me, I felt like I had to speak up, and I did it by writing this short book that outlines the whole political gymnastics that our legislature went through to basically force this into law.
Yeah.
There's even some stuff that's come out since I completed this book that even exacerbated that even more. So.
Now, when you're looking at all these laws that are being passed and you're thinking about all the behind the scenes, like, how is it that they get away with that stuff? Right?
It's Massachusetts. It's basically a one-party state, and they basically just do everything the way they want to do it, and they justify it their own way. As a matter of fact, part of this whole procedure, they put in something that said they can break their own laws, break their own rules. They suspended rules, both in the Senate and the legislature, to push this through.
So how does something like that happen? And does it always require a group of people having to stand up and get so many petitions to combat it? Like, how does something?
Well, what happened is, as far as the petition is concerned, what happened was, the long story short, the legislature and Senate agreed behind closed doors. They wrote what became Chapter 135, Bill H-4885. They basically wrote that in the dark, behind closed doors. Three members of the Senate, 3 members of the legislature. They submitted the bill on a Wednesday night, I believe at like 6:30, and then they voted on it the next morning at like 11 a.m. Now tell me, how do you know what's in a 126-page bill enough with, no questions, no debate, nothing? They just said, the Speaker of the House said, I want this. The President of the Senate said, I want this. And the majority of both houses passed it. A week later, the governor signed it into law. Okay? Then getting to the petition portion of it, what happened was the citizens who were against this started a petition, a referendum, if you will, that would put the Chapter 135 on the ballot in 2026. Let the citizens decide. Okay? We needed about 36,000 certified signatures for that to happen. If we got 50,000 certified signatures, the law would be suspended until it was voted on by that referendum. Well, what happened was in October, it was plainly evident that both those numbers were achieved. Okay? So the legislature and the governor, in their own way of doing things, decided we can't let this happen. So the governor, with the flick of her pen, said, this law is an emergency. I'm signing an emergency preamble, and it went into law the next day. That's how they do things in Massachusetts. So it's still going to be on the ballot in 2026, but because of her actions, I guess the way I understand it is, once it's in law, it can't be suspended. So we ended up collecting, I believe it was like 93,000 certified signatures. So there's at least 93,000 residents who don't agree that this law is just. Okay? They asked the governor, okay, you signed it in July. It wasn't an emergency then. Why is it an emergency now? And basically, as I understand it, her reply was, well, we just looked at it. Okay, so it sat there for almost 3 months, and then they decided, and let's be real, they saw that it was going to be suspended, so they made it an emergency so it couldn't be suspended.
How much of an emergency could it have been if they were letting it sit there for 3 months?
Right. And that's the way the law works. Once she signed it, it takes 90 days for it to become law unless there's an emergency preamble. As I understand it, whenever it's an emergency preamble, it's the same time as the governor signs it. I believe this is a first, here almost 3 months later.
So can you explain to me a little bit about the law that they put in place and what it is that it's restricting when it comes to your rights to be able to get a firearm?
There's a lot to it.
Okay.
Let me explain a couple of other things that happened.
Sure.
Okay? Part of the law was going to require citizens who wanted their license to carry to go through way more education before they could apply, more than we've ever had to go through before. I believe it's even as much as police have to go through to be policemen, but whatever it is. Well, that was such that when the bill came out the next day, the Gun Owners Action League filed a lawsuit on that portion of the law, the educational requirements. The state police also said, we're not supporting this, at least as of now. They gave them no budget, no infrastructure. They just threw this all out. Here's what the citizens have to do. There were no teachers, instructors certified to teach what they required, so hence came this lawsuit. So then they said, well, okay, we'll suspend that for that piece of the law for 18 months. Okay? Then another piece that they did in the same fashion was, there's this nebulous term of assault weapons. Okay? And they've had this category that were illegal to have in Massachusetts because Massachusetts determined them as assault weapons. Well, what they did is they changed the definition of assault weapons to basically be any semi-automatic rifle. Okay? This goes back to, rifles that people have been using for 50, 100 years. They are now illegal in Massachusetts. If you didn't have it before August 1st, you can no longer obtain a semi-automatic rifle or shotgun in Massachusetts. Okay? In the same vein, Massachusetts has maintained these rosters of handguns that if it's not on the roster, a dealer cannot sell that gun to a Massachusetts citizen. And they go through, the manufacturers have to go through all this testing and all this stuff to get their guns on the roster. Okay? And again, they called it the Massachusetts Approved Firearms Roster. The term firearms is very important, okay? Because firearms in Massachusetts were basically handguns, okay? Rifles were rifles and shotguns were shotguns. Well, they changed with this law, buried in the minutia, was the new definition of firearm. The new definition says handguns, rifles, and shotguns are now firearms, which means, according to the law, they have to be on the rosters before they can be sold to a citizen. Okay? Let me ask you, how many rifles and shotguns are on the rosters?
Probably none at this point.
None,
Yeah.
absolutely none. Which also said nobody could basically buy a rifle or shotgun. That was brought to light, that they pulled that fast one, and they said, oh, okay, we won't enforce that now. Okay, so here's two major pieces of that law that are now being enforced even though it was an emergency. Okay, so they said if it's not their new assault style weapon, you can still buy your rifles and shotguns as you always did. Okay, but that now leaves it to, again, you still can't buy semi-automatic shotguns, which are the most popular. Shotguns or rifles. You know, you can buy a bolt action or a lever action. That's it. Okay. So yeah, those are some of the fast ones that they pulled, you know, for this emergency bill that now comes through. Another thing that they did, I told you they made semi-automatic rifles illegal, and shotguns for many, many years. And there's two categories of licenses: the LTC, which is the license to carry, and there's also what's called the FID card, Firearms ID, which is a limited, it basically limits the holder to some rifles, basically, and to buy ammunition. Okay, so a lot of people who only hunted would just get an FID card. They'd take their rifles and go hunting. Well, many of them shot with semi-automatic shotguns or semi-automatic rifles. Been happening for as long as there've been semi-automatic firearms. Okay? Well, they determined that if you only have an FID card, you can't hunt with you can't own a semi-automatic rifle. Okay? And not only can you not own it, it's a felony if you have one. So these people who've been doing this for how many years?
Generations.
They're now,
Yeah.
at the swipe of the governor's pen, are now felons. Okay? They also said that any youths, anybody under 18, cannot come hunting in Massachusetts. Okay? Many of these people bought their hunting license, you know, for the season. And then the law says, no, you can't hunt there. But they won't refund their fees. They said, no, there's other ways. You can go hunt with a bow and arrow, you know?
Right.
So, and it just goes on and on with all these different pieces of the law, you know?
So, is the only way that someone would fight the way that all this is going down is by either, basically this law is in effect, right? There's been points that they've suspended even though it was an emergency law that they had to put through,
Right.
which doesn't make sense, right? Because if it's an emergency, how are you suspending these services, and where's the funding that needs to get these services going if you need them so bad, right? So how does someone who doesn't agree with these methods of how governors are doing what they're doing with firearm, you know, what everything is labeled as firearms now, and the slick ones that they're pulling, how does like a regular citizen who wants to combat these do it? Is it just petitions? Is it they have to vote these governors out? Like, how is it that they go about changing the way things are being done?
As far as I can see it, there's a few things that have to happen. One, we have to change the whole political climate in this state. You know, it's so heavily one party that, again, we've seen it. They just do whatever they want. And the way this state has gone, you know, it's that woke, far left, you know, mentality that this is just what we're going to do. So, the only way is to, start voting these people out and get more responsible ones that aren't just going to follow the party guidelines,
Do you feel like that's happening?
I'm sorry?
Do you feel like that's happening or going to happen? Like, in your honest opinion, do you, like, as I'm talking to you, your frustration seems to come from the position of there's no fixing it in sight. It's going to be pulling tooth and nail to get it done.
Yeah. It's, well, what I'm hoping is, there's stuff happening at the federal level, and let's face it, part of this was we called this the Bruin response, the Bruin decision by the Supreme Court in 2022.
That was the New York case?
It was the New York rifle and pistol case, right? Mm-hmm. Overturned so much of what these restrictive states were doing. So this is their way to get around it. I guarantee you, if pieces of this bill get to the Supreme Court, they'll immediately be overturned. The whole thing here is they're pandering to the virtue signaling anti-gun people,
right?
And
they're just going to, when it comes to,
they're just going to do as much damage as they can until it gets overturned. I'm firmly convinced they know,
right,
deep inside, that what they're doing will not pass muster. But they just figure if it takes years to get to the Supreme Court, that's what's going to happen. I mean, we see it. I have a part-time job in a shooting range in store, and I see people. I'm leaving the state. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's even more pieces to it that they've just jammed in, which make it more restrictive on the responsible gun owner. They talk about, oh yeah, we passed, if you see anything from the media, it's, presented by the politicians that we're getting ghost guns off the street and we're, doing the stronger red flag laws. What criminal is going to not use their ghost,
Yeah.
So, but they're, pandering that out there, As a matter of fact, they've expanded these red flag laws to the fact that the school teacher can say that your kid is a danger. It used to be it had to be a law enforcement or a medical professional that can call for a red flag law. Now it's most anybody. I don't know all the categories, but as far as I can see, if you yell at the secretary at the doctor's office because you've been waiting 2 hours, she can say you're a danger. And you have guns and I'm afraid of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just goes on and on and on with so many categories of this law. And again, what frustrates me is, as a responsible gun owner, I don't want to see criminals causing problems with guns. It kills me, all through the hearings and everything, all these politicians and the virtue signaling groups say, oh, Massachusetts is such a safe state because of our strong gun laws. Begs the question, why more if it's so safe? But really, that fails the eye test. You watch the news in the morning, every day there's some kind of shooting, okay? And I guarantee you that that's not some responsible guy who practices at the range that's out there shooting up the streets.
Right.
That's the frustrating part. I have spoken to politicians. We would like to be part of solutions, okay? But yet we have to fight against you because all you're doing is squeezing us. It's been 100 years and those days are over. We're fighting back,
right,
until we can have our rights.
Right.
that are our rights. I don't mean you, but, some politician doesn't have a right to say, I can't have my rights.
Right.
Yeah. And so they chip away with little things here, little things there. Now they've just gone too far.
Until they suffocate it with legal jargon.
Right.
To the point where they put, all of a sudden, all the things that they said they weren't going to do because you were fighting back, they found loopholes around it. So here's 2 questions for you. One, can you explain a little bit about when you say New York and Boeing overturned for the
Bruen decision.
Brewing decision. If you could talk a little bit about that, and then why don't we start there, and then I'll ask the next one.
Okay.
Actually. So
the Bruen decision in June of 2022 basically overturned a lot of the restrictions on. They basically said, you can't infringe on the Second Amendment. In New York, Massachusetts, a number of other states had very restrictive policies on issuing what we call LTC here in Massachusetts, a license to carry. It used to be that they didn't, even though you had no criminal record, you're an upstanding citizen, if they didn't like the shirt you had on that day, they could say, no, you can't have a license to carry.
Jeez.
Or you can only have one to go shoot at a range or only go hunting. So there were all these different categories. Supreme Court said no. If you are not a prohibited person, then it is your right to be able to own a firearm, period, for your protection.
Right.
So a lot of I call them the hissy fit states, Massachusetts being one of the leaders, are doing all these Bruen response plans to try and get around because, let's face it, the politicians in Massachusetts are certainly more intelligent than those members of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this leads to my next question. It ends up why they end up doing a lot of behind the back, behind closed doors, changing meetings at the last seconds, sending people, like in your book, when I was understanding it, when they were doing that tour that you were talking about, and it would be like all of a sudden people that were anti-gun rights were showing up at the meetings on time because they got all the updates, and then the people that were pro-gun rights were all of a sudden, they'd show up to the meetings and the meetings had been changed last minute, no notifications, and somehow it was always this, you're supposed to be doing it like this from what you said on your schedule, but all of a sudden there's all these changes and behind closed door meetings. So, like, how does, I'm trying to say it in like a constructive way instead of just sounding like an asshole. It's frustrating to hear, I guess, is where I'm getting at.
It's frustrating to live through.
Right. And how do things like that happen? Like, how do they give you a timeline of saying, and then how do they get away with doing all that? And that, like, I get it. It's a one-party state. I know it's going to come back to that, but it's just frustrating to just hear that that's the...
And what I hope will come from this, and let's face it, the 2A community, let me face it, some of the very far right, okay? Fine. But then on the other end are the people, Moms Demand Action, Giffords, Everytown, all those groups, they have their priorities. There's no meeting of the minds there, They're going for what they want. But there's a whole population out there that's in the middle. Many of them are just, we don't care about guns, let them do whatever they want.
Sure.
Okay? But there are also a lot of citizens that I hope we reach that say, look how to bastardize society, look how to bastardize the laws. Take the guns out of the topic and plug something in that's important to you. Follow every one of those steps the way they did. Would you be happy that they pulled that on you? First Amendment rights, whatever. You know, they'll, oh, you can't have a gas car, They just come out and say, we're telling you can't have a gas car anymore. What are you going to do? How would you like it? Would you start fighting back?
Right.
And that's where I hope the citizens come about and say, no, we don't like you doing business this way. I don't care about the topic. You can't do business that way. They totally violated process here, and I think responsibility. I wish it were possible to sue politicians who pass bad law, and law that will ultimately be overturned. Why should they keep their jobs and keep doing what they're doing? Because they have you by the neck. They got the thumb on the back of your neck. You're not powerful enough to push it off.
So how do you think, if best case scenario, let's start there. A best case scenario, how does this play out for the responsible gun owner? How do you think this all plays out in terms of it getting to the Supreme Court and it getting rejected, and then in terms of the time it takes between now to get to that point, best case scenario of how everything plays out would look like what? So worst case scenario plays out in time until it gets to the point where either it gets voted on 2026, right? That's what, or 2026, or when did you
2026.
say? 2026, right. Or it gets basically overturned at a higher court. So what do those two scenarios look like for the average person, like in your eyes, when it comes to the abuse of power and then the fighting back and trying to limit the abuse of power?
Well, the worst case scenario is people just give up. And I see it all the time. I said, I'm just so sick of the state. I read something, that there's 1,000 people a week moving out of Massachusetts. Not just gun owners, but just people who are sick of the,
at home, yeah.
I can't verify that, but I read it somewhere and I believe it. Mm-hmm. Again, I see people come in to the store or come for their licensing class and they're just fed up with it.
Yeah, there was when I was taking the course, there was a guy there who was from New Hampshire, and he was explaining how he had, I don't know if he had moved specifically because of the limitations they started putting on his shotguns and things like that. You guys were talking about some of the guns there. I remember that day.
Right.
So I could see how that's I don't know if that's true either, but I could see how, for the sake of the story that we're telling, how it may fall along the lines of being true because of people being fed up with laws that are being passed to which they can't even fight because there's always some type of loophole that's being pulled.
Right.
So then best case scenario would be what?
Yeah. Before we get to that, so
Okay.
you brought up the topic of the out-of-state people. This law affects even the Massachusetts non-resident. Okay? It used to be that if you wanted to come to a shooting range or a club that you might belong to or be invited to, bringing your gun to a gun show or bringing it in for repair, you could just come in, of course, locked up, unloaded, for safety. You could just bring the gun in and do your thing and go home. Not anymore, okay? Anybody who wants to bring a gun into Massachusetts, and this doesn't count just passing through. If you're going from New Hampshire to Rhode Island, yes, but federal law says you can just drive through with it. But if you're going to come in here for some kind of activity, you have to have a Massachusetts non-resident permit, even if I want to bring a gun down to get it repaired. Okay?
Jeez.
Not only that, I'm supposed to, I'm a New Hampshire resident, even though I'm heavily involved with this Massachusetts stuff. I'm supposed to register every one of my guns with Massachusetts. Okay?
I remember you telling me this, yeah.
This is new part of the law.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, every Massachusetts resident is supposed to register their guns. Okay? Here's a kicker to that. I don't know how they've been getting away with it for years, but the Firearm Owners Protective Act of 1986 passed by, I believe, Ronald Reagan, specifically says that no government agency, state or federal, can maintain registries of firearms. So how can Massachusetts make us register guns, even though they've been doing it for years? Okay? And you have to have serial numbers on the guns, which they'll provide you a serial number for a fee.
That was so kind.
Yeah.
I wonder what kind of business revenue is behind all this planning.
I'm sure, you know. Yeah. So best case scenario, back to that, I'm hoping with a change in Washington, okay, that they will just force these issues out. You know, I mean, you saw the Bruin decision made a massive change, okay? I'm hoping that happens again. I know they're looking for now, nationwide reciprocity. The reciprocity means that, okay, you hold a Massachusetts license to carry, other states will recognize that and allow you to be in their state with, following their rules. Not every state does that. Massachusetts accepts no other states' LTC. That's how superior they are here.
Yeah.
Okay? So if nationwide reciprocity goes through, every state has to recognize every other state's LTC. So I'm hoping that can cause a seismic shift and just force these people to honor the Second Amendment and honor people's rights and get to the business of what they should be doing and eliminate crime. You know, like I said, we want to be part of that solution,
Right.
but we can't, and they just don't listen, or I believe they don't care. I don't believe, eliminating crime is on their agenda.
I feel like that's a business to them. I feel like crime and different aspects of what goes on in cities is all, do we allow it and how profitable is it to us? And I know it sounds almost kind of like, I don't know. I think these last couple of years, kind of watching how politics has been, because it's been front and center, it makes you almost, do I trust what they're telling me anymore? And I'm not saying
absolutely
everything that's and here's my thing. Not that I'm saying everything they say is a lie, but just because of how everything is played out, it makes you question everything like it is a lie.
Oh, yeah.
So when you're being told, and then you see things like, all these backhand deals, and we release it with 12 hours before we're going to vote on it, that type of deal. It's like the people who it affects don't even get a chance to read it or be able to finally go through it. They just, here you go, surprise. So.
Right. I call them the legislative lemmings.
Yeah, I think I saw that on your chapter or something like that. Yeah. What do you, when you say the change in Washington, what do you mean by that? Do you mean in terms of the new president? What do you exactly mean?
Well, there's obviously a new president who's been very pro Second Amendment. It's, the Senate and the legislature, Congress has turned over to be more red, to use that term, and therefore there have been more pro-Second Amendment, or put it this way, there have been less forcing restrictions and stupid laws that do nothing but appease the virtue signaling, get rid of the guns, let's make it a socialist state, where the population can't defend themselves. So it's not just like one thing. There's a whole societal thing, special interest thing, virtue signaling thing, all combining, and it picked up too much steam, if you ask me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see like I guess the term that I hear a lot is like the woke movement. It's these type of things that I hear that has also gotten to the point where being any form of proud to defend yourself or have the rights to defend yourself or having any form of aggression, it almost comes off like you're the person in the wrong because you've chosen to go against the grain of what everybody else is saying because it just sounds good or it doesn't. I don't know. How do I say this? I find myself asking if I believe in something, like when, the whole Trump thing was happening or the guns things were happening, I'd have conversations with people just to kind of see what their reactions were and where they were. And you realize from living in Massachusetts, it's a very blue state, like a very blue state. So the majority of people you're going to talk to, when you start to side with what might be the opposite of what you grew up with, because I grew up here. So like for me, I was like the guy who was like Joe Biden before, I was like, when Trump's first run, I was like, nah, Joe Biden, screw Trump, this is crazy. And then the second time around, I'm like, well, there's a lot of stuff going on that's kind of funny that I didn't pay attention to the first time around because I was just told Trump was so bad. So because he was bad, I was just rooting for the other team. I didn't even know what the other team was doing, but I was rooting for the other team.
That's sad.
Yeah. Well, but that's the group. Like what I'm saying is like that's all associated by the area I'm in. This is what I'm hearing, and to come the second time around and to just be a little bit more educated, a little bit more aware because of the people I'm around with. You start to hear two sides of stories versus one side, and it starts to almost, if you're just an open-minded person, you don't have to choose an opinion, but if you just listen to both and you have common sense, you start to realize, hey, what is happening here? What is really happening here to our freedoms, and are we just going to be okay with not doing anything about it because it's not a topic that's important to us until it's too late because they found ways to handicap everything else, and by the time they get to our topic, they know all the ins and outs of all the things that's happening behind closed doors to be able to just know EVs or, these things that you were kind of like saying if we switched it to this topic. So do you see a solution for firearms or rifles or shotguns? Just, I know I'm labeling them here as firearms under Massachusetts, and they all kind of fall into the same thing. But before they did, do you see a solution that would be long term that would eventually stop all this constant pressure on firearms, and constantly putting new laws on them because of things that have happened? Do you ever see a solution that will eventually get to the point where like they just stop putting laws on it? Everybody's kind of happy with how do you see that?
Perfectly honest, I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime.
Okay.
I hope that it does. I strive to make it happen wherever it can happen. Some people just consider Massachusetts too far gone. I can't go there yet. But I'm hoping that sooner or later, even some of these hardcore anti-gun people will realize, we need the media to come along and stop, puppeting what they want, what the politicians want you to hear, and maybe, publicize. There's so many cases where a good guy with a gun does a good thing, or you just protect yourself, because they say, well, the police can take care of me, but, when seconds matter, the police are minutes away. And I love our police. I totally respect them.
Me too.
But you're your own first responder. We're our own first responder. Mm-hmm. We have to be able to take care of ourselves and our families and friends, what have you. So. And
you can even find yourself in trouble when someone breaks into your home and you use your firearm. It's
unfortunately, I scare some people away because, not only you have to defend yourself more than once because you're guilty until proven innocent in this state.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at this point, it's kind of like you have to bunker down in a room and be at almost your back up against the wall with no other resort to be there to save you before you could even potentially think about using your firearm. It's not
Right.
even like you have the right to. It's what's the situation in that moment for you.
And that brings me to this, you get this, oh, you people just want to go out and kill people, you're bloodthirsty, And believe me, I and every responsible person does not want to have to do it.
Yeah.
But I want to be prepared,
Right.
and I tell people it's not just having a gun that protects you. You have to be trained. You have to be mentally, morally, physically, and unfortunately, financially ready for the aftermath of the shooting, which is worse probably than an actual shooting.
Yeah.
So I train people, and to your point, we say run to the wall, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah.
If you can get away until your back is absolutely to the wall, you don't want to have
Engage,
to shoot.
yeah.
Are there some cowboys out there, yahoos? Somebody comes through my door, blowing them away.
And then then you're catching a case that
but
your family doesn't get to see
the
you,
responsible firearm practitioner, is your next door neighbor, nice guy kind of person. They're not all flannel shirt wearing, bearded, rednecks. The doctors, lawyers, more women these days.
Yeah.
And it's funny, Massachusetts gun ownership is going up, and I think people are realizing that. Personally, I've never felt as unsafe as I do now.
Okay.
And because we know, they don't prosecute criminals. They don't even put them in jail, And, I won't even get into all the illegal immigration stuff, but it's just not a safe world out there.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you go some places and, when the hair stands up on the back of your neck, something is wrong. And you try and avoid it, but sometimes you can't.
Yeah. I mean, knock on wood. Thankfully, I hope to never find myself in a scenario where I ever have to draw my firearm.
Yeah.
But so coming from a position of never having a firearm and now having a firearm, right? Not fully, but to the extent that I explained to you earlier, there is a sense of peace of mind that comes over you in terms of there's always, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm failing you to holding a firearm versus with someone like yourself who's been doing it for years. There's a sense of I'm more aware of what's going on in the room because I always find myself kind of be responsible, be patient,
Right.
be understanding of what's going on right now. Don't let your emotions get the best of you. Just take everything in slowly and be
Right.
more. So it's kind of weird because I was never a firearms owner beforehand. So now being one to hear that the labeling of people who have firearms is almost like they're sporadic. They can't wait to use it. And the truth of the matter is no, you're comparing this responsible person to the criminal and using tendencies that the criminal has and labeling it to the responsible person and trying to somehow use those to limit the responsible.
Right.
When at the end of the day, and you've told me this, is do you think a criminal is not going to find a way to get a gun just because you told them they have to register it?
Right.
Yeah,
and that's why I laugh at all these, laws and programs and everything because they're just for show. What good does it do?
Right.
They say Massachusetts is safe because of our strict firearm laws. You feel safe? You watch the news?
Yeah. I follow it. I definitely follow it. So here's my question to you, because I know in a little bit we got the next stuff going on.
We got plenty of time.
Okay. When someone picks up your book, right? So it's a short read, 30 pages, really easy. If you're handing it to them for the first time, right, and they're going to read it, what of those chapters, if you could only suggest one chapter for them to really hook them, and be the one that gives them the most information on why it's important to read this book. Because early on you had some quotes, when you open up the book and things like that. But I enjoyed all the parts for different reasons. My favorite for me was the timeline part, because once I saw that, it was...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's chapter 6, The Path of Deceit, and that's where I say, plug in another topic, and is this, the people you want governing you, I think that is the, I think most important part of the process, and the, what do you call it, I think they've all violated their constitutional oath. They're passing things that are illegal, unconstitutional, or however you want, immoral, however you want to look at it. They're just violating the process to get what they want, And I think if you asked any citizen out there, again, take guns out of the topic, do you want your legislature to just shove stuff up your butt, because they can, and because that's what they want, for their own political gains or whatever.
Right. Now you labeled, not you labeled, but you gave names of the people who are like Day and the different people who played the roles in kind of doing these things.
Right.
If you remove them from the picture, what I'm understanding is even the next wave of people that would come into play would still almost play this game because of the direction it's always kind of been in. When do you think that turn happened, where it started going down this path? Where, like, at what point, like, was there a certain point where there was a law that made people understand, like, Massachusetts is now taking a direction of trying to get rid of your guns? Like, what was the turning point?
I think they've been there for a long time. It's just the way it's gone there. I remember many years ago when I was living in Somerville, where I actually grew up, and had moved back there, and I was told, don't even bother applying for a gun license. That's it, You
weren't going to get it no matter how hard you wanted it. Wow.
So, I mean, we're going back 20 years at least on that, and it's been that wave of, we're gonna dictate how people can live, so.
Now, you think that's just the business behind closed doors, like them putting all these laws into place? Is there financial behind it that makes sense for them to do these things, or is it like a control thing? Where it's like,
you keep mentioning business. I think it's more control.
Sure.
Okay. We want our communities to be this way. Therefore, there's an old saying, if you want to change your behavior, tax it or put a law on it.
Sure.
So I think that's...
Hence all the tariffs that Trump is saying, I'm going to change every way. Tariff, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
but I'm just relating it to the taxation part of...
Elizabeth Warren wanted to put a 50% tax on guns and ammunition.
Yeah. That's wild. That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But another piece of it, you talk about, the timeline and everything, but look at how younger people have grown up with what they see on television and video games and everything. And I think that's a big problem. We have some very disturbed people out there.
Meaning like the wild shows in terms of what they portray? Like what exactly do you know?
You look at like Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto. They glorify and desensitize people.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and
Uh-huh.
but that's what we've been watching, you know. And it's funny, I was reading something about how desensitized the current couple of generations have become. You know, that's why they think nothing of shooting somebody because they've been doing it in the video games.
Sure.
So when it comes to real life, you know, they're almost offended that somebody challenges them. So we'll just shoot them.
Right.
And they think nothing of it.
Right. I think we talked about this last time I met up with you, which was there was a shooting in a club up in New Hampshire, and it was, I could only imagine the transition because I only saw some of the camera work because it was all over like TikTok and stuff when I saw it. But basically there was a guy who was at a bar in New Hampshire. He ends up getting out of the bar he was in after getting into some like altercation in there. He's coming out of the bar kind of like swinging his gun. He drops it, he picks it up. Those type of people, the second you see that, those are not the responsible gun owners.
Absolutely not.
Those are the, I'm using this as a way of getting some type of respect for myself because I've never had it.
Right.
And now because I'm getting disrespected, I'm going to show you need to respect me.
Right.
Right? And
I bet you that person probably had absolutely no training, just got a gun.
no, I think when I watched the video, because I was DJing in a club that was next to that while it was happening, and they ended up locking the club down that I was in because the shooting literally happened on the street that the club was on. And the club that I was in had the footage of the whole situation, and they showed it to me. And you could just tell the person who did the shooting and ended up going to jail, it was no form of training. It was all just, I got punched at, now I'm going to pull out my gun and I'm going to shoot until this person isn't moving. Right? It was nothing in this, like, I feel like a trained person would never resort to that. They would try to get away from the situation way before it got escalated to that.
That's, you know, part of my advanced training is diffusing situations and, you know, putting your position where you don't have to shoot. You know, we always say it's better to be a good witness than it is a good defendant. You know, and the fight you're not in is the one you win. You know, so.
Yeah.
And I tell people, you know, a lot of people till they realize it, they think, okay, I got a gun, I'm safe. You're not. You know, there's people who are black belts in street fighting kind of stuff. Yeah. And there are folks that can, you know, disarm you. I mean, you know, it's just, again, the person who just has a gun is just a guy or a girl with a gun. Right.
Yeah.
You know.
I, hanging out with you, have hope for people who are looking to get their licenses. I just want to let you know that. Yeah. I know you see what you see, so it's a darker side for you, but because I see you fighting the darker side, and I'm not the guy who knows enough, but I just know enough to trust the guy who taught me how to get, you know, you showed,
right.
You know, you trained.
And that's, you know, not pontificating or glorifying myself. I consider that part of my responsibility, and I like doing it.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't have given you a certificate if I thought you were some nutcase who's going to go shoot up a nightclub.
Yeah, nope, I'm good. Yeah. I'm good.
But yeah, and I now have over 1,500 students.
Nice.
You know, that I put through licensing courses or personal training or something like that. And my goal, and they'll tell you, you know, you get a pretty good lecture from me.
Oh, yeah.
About doing it right. And if you're not, don't get your gun.
Yeah. I mean, the first, however many hours we were in that class, I remember like the first hour or so was just all the things not to do with your gun. All the videos and everything you showed us was, So
idiots with guns.
Yeah. I come from the position of, because people like you exist, I know that firearms will be something that will always be fought for, to continue to have that, because if That's right. Like, I think the reason it was put there, and I think you wrote the founding fathers. We have to bring it back to the point of why they wrote it
Right.
in your book. So I'm inspired to have people like you. I get what you see, but from my position as someone who just got his license and is working in the process of doing what he's doing, I'm thankful. So I appreciate you doing this, and I know we got to wrap up. I see some people coming in, and whatnot. But anything you want to kind of talk about before we wrap it up? Is there anything we didn't get to talk about in the book, or something you really wanted to kind of?
Right. No, I just hope people will reach out to me for the book. I give it away.
Yeah.
All I ask is, A, you support the Gun Owners Action League, if you would, with a membership or a donation, or make sure that non-gun people read it with an open mind.
Right.
I'll get it to anybody who wants it. I just get me an email, and you can have a copy of it.
Cool.
The
And how do
idea-
where do people reach you? What's the best place? Is it Facebook, Instagram, email? Like, what do you prefer?
Facebook will get me.
Okay. Cool. And I'll put a Facebook link here so that everybody has
Right.
it for you. Yeah.
And I can give you an email too, whatever.
Yeah. Perfect. I think I have your email, so I can just add that on the bottom.
And, I'll just email you a copy of the book. Please read it with an open mind.
It's good.
And
It's good.
And,
I like
and pass it along.
Yeah. I recommend it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a good book. I recommend it. I think it comes from the tone of you love what you do. So
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Jim, another
Thank you.
great episode here with you. I appreciate this.
Hopefully
and,
there'll be more.
Best of luck with the restaurant.
Thank you.